Okay. According to YouTube, my mic is picking up sound. I don't know if you guys could hear it, but YouTube tells me my mic is working. My computer tells me my mic is working. Can you hear me? I'm just going to assume because YouTube is picking up sound that you can actually hear me. Okay. So, the chair of the department flipped out and called me into her office with her co chair to see if I needed counseling. You understand this is an academic program? I should have known better. I'd already had a run in with the official art authorities when I visited with my contemporary art class from Transylvania University in Lexington. During a tour of MoMA, or the Guggenheim maybe, I went bananas when I saw a Dadaist work stuck behind a barrier with a do not touch sign on it, even though it was a card catalog type thing, whose whole point was to be touched, browsed thoroughly, and smudged. And I sneered aloud, quote, "They've killed it, they've killed it. What a horrible place. They don't understand art at all," end quote. And went on in that vein the whole tour came to a halt, so I could get chewed out. A friend comforted me by saying one day we'd come back with water pistols full of acid and liberate the spirit of the thing by dissolving it entirely. Later, though, I heard he'd become an art conservator. The night after that performance in grad school, I got kicked out of the apartment I shared in Corona, Queens, with Jorg, the brother-in-law of an ex-girlfriend's ex, and Rosa, an elderly Colombian lady who used to help with errands. Jorg told me, quote, "Rosa called the landlady and told her you're a child of the devil. You have to be out of here by tomorrow morning. She only let you move in because I told her you were engaged. I'm really sorry," end quote. So at dawn, I was squatting outside Tisch School of the Arts, waiting to stash my bags at the Women in Performance Journal where I'd been working for a whole 2 weeks. I'd mostly walk on the treadmill when everybody was gone, glancing occasionally at the video camera to see if it was still watching. I only ran it for an hour. After that, it was just me. A discussion with the universe, gestures on one side, silence on the other. I filled the emptiness with bookkeeping, taking notes of distances, walked calories burned, songs played, time putting my mediocre suffering on display while elsewhere people were dying of AIDS and my roommates pretended I was doing something as normal as watching TV. When Ren's latest boyfriend, Paul, would come over, he'd call out, "How's it going, sport?" as he passed through to Ren's room in the back where they'd put Sinatra on really loud and fuck, squish, glomp their way to the moon and stars, old Jupiter and Mars. I sent them subliminal messages, quote, "Isn't that what public toilets are for?" End quote. "How about a nice back room at the bar?" End quote. Okay. Um, I have to say I'm a little bit confused about the timeline here. Okay, never mind. Because so she's living with Amy and Renz, right? And then I guess this is like this is before that because she said I'd done a whole unscheduled shaving performance at NYU, which led to her getting kicked out of this place. So that must have been okay. Never mind. I'm not confused. Momo, are you okay? She seems traumatized. Squeaky is here annexing her food. Yeah. Okay. The only day I skipped was drizzly, disgusting St. Patrick's Day. The street corners were still marked with patches of calcified snow that looked more like coal deposits than something you'd want to put in a cone. Uptown, a sparse crowd shivered on Fifth Avenue, while queers gathered in front of the Plaza Hotel with their own Irish band of bagpipers and drums and kilts, getting ready to protest Ilgo's exclusion from the parade. It was getting to be a tradition, for me anyway. I'd been there since '91, the first year they applied to march. When the Hibernians turned down their request, a participating group invited Ilgo to join them. I'd just met Marie and Anne, and joined the fun along with David Dinkins, New York's first African American mayor. To show his solidarity, he walked with us instead of out in front, and for his trouble got hours of insults, catcalls, and abuse, plus a couple of beer cans tossed at his head by a vicious crowd. Oh, Izzy says, by the way, Amy was her ex already just from the beginning of the book. They were just living together as friends. Okay, thank you for clarifying. Because, like, the relationship she has with women, they're not like she explains them, but she doesn't explain them in the context of time. So it's kind of hard to know like what things happened in which order. Matt Adams says that she still hasn't gotten any notifications from YouTube. Yeah, I think they've like officially deboosted me. So I think what I need to do, which I said I was going to do yesterday, but then immediately I did not. Like I got in bed and did nothing after the stream yesterday. I need to like pre-schedule all my streams, even if the time is going to change, and then everybody can turn on notifications for like set a reminder for stream, and that way you'll get the reminder for the stream because you like signed up for it. Like instead of counting on the fact that you subscribe to me and you'll get a notification. You know what I'm saying? Like I said, I know I'm dressed weird today, but it's because I have hair dye. I don't want to get all my shit covered in hair dye. Okay. Okay. The year afterward, Ilgo's application was refused again, but the city gave us a permit to hold a countermarch going up Fifth before the official parade. The crowd had at us again, screaming insults and threats. You should all die of AIDS was popular. So was you should have your own parade, and this is our parade, not yours. As if queer cancelled out Irish, and Lucy Lynch hadn't had brothers in Long Kesh, and Anne Maguire had never worked in the campaign of the legendary Bernadette Devlin McAlskey. Nope, not Irish enough. Disqualified. Visa cancelled. Even though the parade was begun in the first place to fight bigotry against the Irish. When we got to the end of the parade route, the cops trapped us in a pen with those wooden blue sawhorses and wouldn't let us out until we'd seen every Irish bar, country association, monstrous step dancing troupe where little girls wore false everything from hair extensions to eyelashes. The worst were the lines of cops and firemen who passed in their dress uniforms, all shouting threats and insults, flipping us the bird. A reminder that queers couldn't count on the people who were supposed to protect us, who we were supposed to turn to after getting attacked on the streets. This was 92. In 93, when the Avengers were at full tilt, the city was refusing to let Ilgo even do a countermarch. We can't guarantee your safety, was the excuse, though Dinkin's sinking poll numbers probably had something to do with it, along with pressure from the archdiocese in an election year. After all, queers lived unprotected every day in New York City. In the time I hung out with Ilgo, this big guy, Tarlac McNeil McNilis, got beaten to within an inch of his life. Little fairy-ish Brendan Fay lost his job teaching religion at a Catholic high school for girls after he marched with Ilgo the first time. Later on in 93, he got stabbed while he was walking home in Brooklyn, the blood from the punctured lung spilling out all over the sidewalk. The cops said it wasn't a biased crime, though the first reports had Brendan's attackers shouting anti-gay slurs. Anonymous callers regularly left violent messages on the answering machine for Anne Maguire and Paul O'Dwyer, who co-founded ILGO. ILGO, for those of you who weren't around earlier, is like the Irish Lesbian and Gay Organization or something. It's like the Irish thing for gay people from the 90s in New York City. After threatening to kill them, they said, "I know where you live." But when it came time to ban us from the parade, suddenly the city was worried about our safety, and for our own sake threatened to arrest any of us who stepped foot onto the street. When the band switched to a jig, we got ready for action. Demonstrators without green cards skedaddled to the far sidewalk so they couldn't get grabbed by mistake and put on the next plane out. When the rest played hokey pokey with the cops. Sorry, and then the rest played hokey pokey with the cops. You put your right foot in, you put your right foot out, and then you put your right foot in, and the cops slap cuffs on your ass and drag you away to the St. Patty's Day wagon. 208 got booked, hands twist tied behind their backs. Mine were cutting off circulation, so climbing on the bus, I shouted, "My cuffs are too tight," and the pissed off cop behind me gave a hard shove, so I fell face first into Maxine Wolf's shoes. And that was that. The parade took place, just the way they wanted, as if nothing had happened and queers didn't exist. Just baton twirlers and marching bands and cops and firemen. All the Irish with their country banners, all the crowds of gaping tourists and fraternity boys getting drunk and celebrating the one day everybody in New York was Irish, except for queers. Queers weren't Irish. Queers had their own parade. The other conspicuous absence was Mayor Dinkins. He didn't go to the parade at all that year. He had a convenient case of diverticulitis. At the cop station, there were they were nicer than I expected, giving me a copy of my mugshot when I boldly asked. Later, I stuck them on the catechus. Am I pronouncing that right? Caduceus. Cadesius. Cadesius? Catechus. Like, I feel like it's Latin. I don't know. After fingerprinting, they gave us a brown paper towel and put us in a cell off to ourselves, segregated by gender. No, you were not segregated by gender, you were segregated by sex. Like, they clearly were not putting the effeminate gay men in with the women, were they? No. Okay. We swapped names, talked, tried to get the ink off our hands. Like, that's the other thing too. She talks about like that there was butch lesbians among the Avengers. So clearly they were segregated by sex, not gender. Okay, whatever. Let's move on. We swapped names, talked, tried to get the ink off our hands. Some of the girls had been arrested a bunch of times, mostly with ACT UP. They were practically connoisseurs and seemed almost disappointed the arrest had been so peaceful and that the toilet with no seat in the corner didn't even really stink. I thought a lot about lunch and peeing alone. I finally broke down and used the toilet, making everybody turn away, but still shield me from view. We got out after a couple of hours. Ilgo threw a big bash that night, but I didn't go. I didn't do a stint on the treadmill either. Anna Simo had been arrested too, and when we were leaving the precinct, I asked her if she thought I had to walk. When she said no, I proclaimed, like walk, because part of the thing with the catechist, for those of you who just showed up, is like she built this kind of like altar to like the way the medical industry fucked her over. I don't know. You can go back and listen to it yourself, but and then she would like walk on a treadmill in front of it, looking at it every day. It was like a kind of meditation for her. And so it was a thing that she did every single day. And so she's saying like this St. Patrick's Day when I got arrested is the only day that I didn't do it that year. I think that's what she said earlier, that this was the only day that year she didn't do it. Yes, Yogi, I know that sex and gender were used interchangeably in the 90s, that they really meant sex, but she wrote this book in 2014. So I'm judging her based on the current cultural usage, like the current vernacular. Okay. Um, right. When she said no, I proclaimed her the Pope of New York. She shook her head in embarrassment, but it was too late. I was absolved. Chapter 8. Easter came and the performance ended. Oh, right, it was through Lent. It was like a Lent thing. The shower cap, yes, because I have hair dye. I'm not going to take it off and show you, but you see it's blue? See it's blue? This is my way of not like when I dye my hair, ideally I leave the hair dye in for at least 3 hours. Today I think it's going to be more like 2 hours. I put it in around 11 and I need to leave here at like 1:30. So, Patricia says, "Did you know about the gender frickets because for me up to 2020 sex/gender was the same thing." Um I'm not sure, but I don't see how it's possible that she could be an activist and not be aware of what the trans community is doing. Like she mentioned there in the first chapter or the second chapter, she talks about um like transgendered black women and what they did for the cause and whatever. So like what book is this? Oh yeah, the title was not it's not a real title. This is the Eating Fire My Life as a Lesbian Avenger by Kelly Cogswell. Aquamarine is asking if I should set no. Like, the hair dye bottle usually says, like, 40 minutes or something, and that's bullshit. Like, I've been dyeing my hair for, like, 13 years. That's bullshit. Um, the longer you leave it in, the darker it will be and the longer it will take to wash out. I always like, I know I put it in at, like, 11, and it's 12:15 now, and I need to leave here at 1:30, so I need to, like, shower at 1 and, like, to get it out. Yeah. Anyway, what color are you using? Um, this is Poseidon from Arctic Fox. This is the one that I was gonna get before that I was like, "Oh, I'll try a new brand because it's like the same product in a different shade." Sapphire by Ion is good. Navy blue that turns to cyan as it fades. I've never used any of the Ion dyes. Um, I've found that Arctic Fox is good, and yeah. Yeah, Radical says when I had brightly colored hair, I left the dye on for literal hours, sometimes 6 to 8 hours. Yeah, like one of the women, I think she was like a hairstylist, because when I was a teenager, the first time I ever got my hair done, like dyed, my mom brought me to a hairstylist, and she only let me get highlights. But then and then another time when I was 16, my grandmother paid for me to go to like a very fancy salon as like a birthday present. And that's when I had like white hair, like platinum. It was kind of cool. And I would do like streaks in the front of different colors. Anyway, but like aside from that, I've always done it myself. I was at this I used to go to this one hair salon, like just for haircuts, not for the dyeing. That was like kind of upscale, like not that much, but they used to like participate in like hair contests where they would like send a stylist to represent the salon, and they would do like crazy haircuts and crazy like hair dyes and stuff. Anyway, the woman from there who I kind of became friendly with, she talked to me about how she dyed her own hair, because she was like, I know you guys are not going to pay for this to be done at the salon, so I'll like, give you my tips and tricks. And she was the one who said get a shower cap. She was the one who was like, put the hair dye in, like first of all make sure your hair is bleached really well. This hair is not bleached very well, whatever. Then she was like, put the hair dye in, put on a shower cap, and leave it on all day. She actually told me that what she does is she does it in the evening, and she goes to puts a towel on her bed and she goes to sleep like this and washes it out in the morning. So that way you have it in your hair for like 8 hours or whatever. Yeah, if your hair is not like white before you start, it's like you're mixing one color with another color. So it's going to be that. It's not going to be like the true color of the dye unless your hair is white. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah, radical. I totally feel you. Yeah. Anyway, okay. Let's keep moving. Oh shit. Actually, I have to answer that. Squeaky, this is not your bed. Okay. It's been 6 years since you stopped dyeing your hair. Yeah. That I initially stopped dyeing my hair because when I moved away to university, I didn't have my sister to bleach my hair anymore. And if your bleach is fucked, then the whole dye job is fucked, right? So I was like, this is pretty pointless. It's like a waste of money and time. And then I just started buzzing my head. I did bleaching and dyeing your hair when your hair is super short is really easy. I did that a couple times, but like it was like really rare. I think I did it twice maybe. Yeah. No, I don't want it like navy navy. I just meant more towards the side of navy than like this pastel baby blue, whatever the fuck it was before I put the hair dye in today. Like I want it to actually be the Sonic the Hedgehog color. That is the color I'm looking for. If you look at the hair dye right now, I think that's the color it's gonna be. Like it's very bright blue. It's like a royal blue almost. Anyway, my hair isn't that dark. It's like on the redder side of brown. It's like an auburn or something. Anyway, whatever. Okay, let's keep reading. Momo, what you doing? Your food is there. Are you aware? Don't, what do you? That's okay. I understand you don't understand pointing. I will be bringing you your food since you're confused. Look, it's not on the desk anymore. Or is that not what you were looking for? Okay. Okay. Easter came and the performance ended. Yeah, so I think this was like a thing from Lent until Easter, I guess. Okay. Something felt resolved, though I didn't know what. I couldn't figure out what to do with the catechist and just left it standing in the living room, entangling the members of the Dyke March committee in barbed wire and rotting tampons. We'd already been meeting for ages, since somebody came to the center, raging that the March on Washington people had scheduled almost nothing for dykes except a couple of artsy events and the power breakfasts where lesbians dressed for success would drink mimosas and honor each other. We decided to hold our own march, a dyke march, and when my hand shot up to be coordinator, it surprised me as much as anybody. Like that time, they'd asked for someone to facilitate an Avengers meeting and had volunteered because I'd once read Robert's Rules of Order after getting elected governor of Kentucky Girls State, that mock government thing in high school. After the first session, Maxine Wolfe said I was the best facilitator she'd ever seen, getting consensuses, moving things along. After several more, efficiency became tyranny, and they all got out the hook. And they got out the hook. The Dyke March prep went better, and mostly because the Avengers were running it, like the well oiled machine you hear so much about and almost never see. It helped that at the end of the meeting, we'd go around the room and say what our task was for the week. You'd be ashamed not to say anything or let it slide. Anna Simo and Carrie Moyer were in charge of promo and media, dubbing themselves the Ministry of Propaganda. But you see how she referenced shame? I think shame is like a useful thing a lot of the time. Like, the whole point of the Lesbian Avengers was to be a direct action group, right? So like if the point is to be a direct action group and then there's women in it who are not taking part in direct action, it's like why are you there? Yeah. Okay. Maxine did the martial training and logistics. Lydia, a visual artist, did the amazing banners. A committee organized fundraising parties that pulled in hundreds of dykes to drink beer and watch go-go dancing activists and videos of our first actions. And when we sent out notices across the country to every dyke bar, bookstore, and newsletter we had ever heard of, Maureen Colburn, who spoke so strongly in front of Rockefeller Center, fielded the calls. It was like magic how vans got rented, hotel reservations made. Blonde, fire eating Allison had a crew working on sewing machines in the street outside the loft on Avenue D, I think, and they made Avengers capes and painted shields. Somebody taught line dancing. That's right, line dancing. What kind of dykes was I mixed up with? Line dancing. The androgynous, slow talking journalist, Anne Dadesky, organized the writing of the manifesto that was going to convert the lesbian masses to the Avengers' cause. She invited everybody to her place on 7th Avenue, laid in a supply of rolling rock, and a handful of us gathered around a formica table like one my grandmother had. I couldn't tell if it was the kitschy sneer or a celebration of the America I came from. I didn't ask. Anne had a way of slouching back in her chair after making a point that made her seem irrefutable. At any rate, there was me and Katie, who was an artist and musician, and Kat, a girl who she hung out with, and Anne's roommate, Brenda, a dyke with long blonde hair and a cherubic face, who used to play the snare at demos. When Jennifer Monson was there, maybe Jennifer Monson was there too, though neither of us is quite sure today. And we popped open green bottles and tossed out lines dipping into our collective semi consciousness, which was full of Emma Goldman, who wanted a revolution you could dance to, and Rosa Luxemburg, who wanted freedom to dissent, and Valerie Solonis, who wanted to cut up men, and the futurist Marinetti, who wanted to demolish libraries and museums and feminism. My brain was goofier stuff too, like TV jingles for dog biscuits, activism built strong bones, and Bible verses I'd memorized since I was 3. We are the apocalypse and the rapture. It became part political manifesto, part lesbian love poem, audacious, whimsical, sincere, like the Avengers. And when we brought it back to the group, they loved it, or seemed to, especially when Carrie Moyer put it on a broadsheet in blood red with the manifesto on one side and a Lesbian Avenger 101 on the other, offering a brief history and basic organizing tips. I still have a few squirreled away, their crimson fading, but not the words. Squeaky has stolen Momo's bed, so then Momo has now sat on my clothes. It's like a rebellion, but they're like 2 feet away from each other. um. Oh, bye, radical. Um. Okay. A group of Avengers went to a little. Sorry, a group of Avengers went down a little early to DC for a demo about lesbians and AIDS. The rest of us followed in a convoy, everybody excited and nervous, especially me. I was afraid that things would go wrong, and it would be mostly my fault. I hadn't written my speech. I scratched notes in a notebook, chewed my cuticles, trying to prod a feverish, empty brain. When Sarah Schulman told me I had to say something in front of the White House, she didn't give me much help. You're a poet. It's going to be great. um, maybe she envisioned some MLK moment with the crowd spread out on the lawn, a mic, and TV cameras as I eloquently described the lesbian dream, but I drew a total blank. Back then, I didn't dream of a future, lesbian or not. I'd started college, sure, I was going to be a medical missionary. Within months, I started having strange pains in my feet and hands, and a rheumatologist in plaid golf pants offered his warning: pick a profession where you don't use your hands or feet. He'd mistakenly decided I had rheumatoid arthritis or lupus, which almost seemed cool because lupus is what killed Flannery O'Connor. I think that was also the year a girl first lifted my hand to her mouth and kissed it in the half dark of the Greyhound bus somewhere between Texas and Lexington. And the year I'd tagged along to a women's studies course and had that shock of recognition you only get once or twice a lifetime when they showed me the list of presidents and I suddenly understood what it meant: that there were no women on it. Almost none in the Senate, and a few in the House. None among the pastors and preachers and brothers I knew. Which was why they dubbed Deb a minister of music, the only woman ever to hold a responsible position, and why they'd humiliated me when I protested. Yeah, they kept me in my place, and my mother in hers, which didn't absolve her of complicity, for watching me curl my finger around a coffee cup and screaming in horror, "You're holding your cup like a man!" That was in all caps. I don't think I expressed that well, but whatever. Oh, hey, Lisa. Okay. It inspired a kind of Huck Finn moment when I decided it was better to risk hell than shrivel in the midst of toxic Southern Baptist morality. I cut my ties, soon left Kentucky. Unmoored, I moved from one city, one thing, to the next, waiting for hours in free clinics, writing poems that were all in intuition and rhythm and feeling deeply, but quickly plumbed. Making these mute gestures in front of 2x4s, still grappling with being a lesbian, no matter how it seemed. Half the reason I'd volunteered to facilitate meetings was that I'd have to use the word. The first thing we said every meeting, after asking if there were cops in the room, was the tagline: The Lesbian Avengers is a direct action group focused on issues vital to lesbian survival and visibility. It was a mouthful, but it meant I had to say the word lesbian, lesbian, lesbian. And it came down to me trying to articulate the lesbian dream. Good luck with that. Somebody turned up the radio. The vans got tapped into trapped in DC traffic. It was going to be a disaster, not just my speech, the whole fucking thing. I was sure of it. Oh yeah, shout out to Lisa for the stream last night. I like listened to it without like watching the video, just like listening to her reading. It was nice. Um when we got to DC, I was a nervous wreck, and the Avengers didn't help much. Most scattering like cats when they were supposed to be blanketing the city with the Lesbian Avengers broadsheet and our club cards for the Dyke March. Finally, the handful of people who did the shit work, like Allison, again, she's calling all these, when she calls women as a general group women, she actually calls them people. I don't like that. Finally, a handful of people, aka women, who always did the shit work, like Allison and KT, saw what was happening and pitched in. After a while, people began to turn away the flyers, but with big smiles. We already have one. Yes, we're coming. I was still nervous. People always say that and never do. We went early to DuPont Circle. We didn't have a permit, and the ACT UP women and Avengers marshals went over tactics one more time. The goal to keep everyone safe, block the streets when they had to, negotiate with the cops who would no doubt be nervous, especially near the White House. Just a couple days before, the feds had stormed the Branch Davidians compound in Waco, Texas, and ended with 76 corpses on their hands, including 20 kids and David Koresh. A lot of people were angry with the government, not us particularly, but who knows what the cops would assume. I did the math while waiting. We only knew for sure we'd have a couple hundred marchers between the Lesbian Avengers and the Dykes from the ACT UP Women's Network that Maxine had invited to join the Dyke March party. We were also entangled with the West Coast group that had emerged after we'd already announced the march and done a lot of work on our own. When they said they had a similar idea, I agreed we should work together instead of throwing a competing marches. It was a fiasco from the start. They skipped half the conference calls with us and the ACT UP women, and when we were forced to make decisions without them, they bitched it was all an East Coast plot. Still, I was glad when they finally turned up with their portable sound system, the only real responsibility they had. Why are you dyeing your hair on live stream? It's the other way around. I was dyeing my hair and then I thought, well, I need to be like sitting up and not lying around. Might as well do a live stream. That's what happened. Um, okay. Okay. At first, the marchers came one by one, then in droves. By 7 p.m. on April 24th, 1993, DuPont Circle was filled to bursting, spilling over with spilling over like a dike Times Square on New Year's Eve. Young ones, old ones, suburban dykes in their khakis, city dykes in their boots, softball dykes with the little rat tails in the back of their short-cut hair, shaved chenilled heads like mine, the big hair of die-hard femmes in dresses, butches dressed to the nines. People knew what the march was before they got to DC, brought their own banners and signs. The rest dragged each other. I was supposed to be in charge, but how can you manage a hurricane? A tsunami of 20,000 dikes? You don't. You just try to get out in front. The Avengers gathered the fire eaters and drummed together with the banner pushed our way to the head of the crowd. When the huge entity started moving, what a roar. The only glitch, if you can call it that, was when we got in front of the White House. The left coast girls and the sound systems were nowhere to be found. Later, I heard they were pissed at all the attention the Avengers were getting and decided not to share. That's so stupid. Okay, I know she's writing this from her perspective, but she literally is saying, um, we planned the event. We advertised it to all the dyke magazines and dyke groups we could think of to tell women to come. Then these women were like, we want to bring our group. And she was like, sure. They didn't show up to the conference calls. They didn't do anything really. Their only job was to bring the sound system. And then when they got there, because the people who organized it, the women who organized it, were in the front and were like being leaders, they got pissed off. So they left with their sound system. That is like the most petty bullshit ever. Like she literally said their group became a group after they had advertised that the Dyke March was like planned. It's so stupid. Okay. Um At any rate, I bellowed the few words I had to say into a bullhorn. Probably no one understood, though I didn't matter much, because all those dykes knew where we were in front of the White House and how we were, enough to fill the streets of the entire city, and that together we were Dyke America taking over the capital. After I got done shouting, a dozen of us Avengers stood on the plastic crates we'd toted from New York. The crowd around us grew quiet. It was getting dark by then. You could hear voices shouting in the background, others yelling, I can't see, what are they doing? We dipped our torches in lighter fluid, lit them, and raised the flames into the air. Then, silhouetted against the familiar glowing white form, we brought them slowly to our faces, which were lit up too. Exhaling as the heat approached our lips, fire entered our mouths and disappeared. The crowds hollered and screamed, and we did it again, while Marlene Colburn tried to get a chant going. The fire will not consume us. We will take it and make it our own. That moment of Dykes eating fire in front of the White House endured as the image of the lesbian Avengers. Photographers sent out their photos. The Ministry of Propaganda shot off their press releases. Journalists from major venues beat down our doors for interviews, marveling at the turnout, at the drama and life compared to the same old of the official March on Washington for lesbian, gay, and bisexual rights and liberation, with all the groups lined up and orderly, all the speeches predictably moving. The message of the Dyke March was in our bodies. All 20,000 of them were there together in front of the White House, lit up with flame. We were disorderly, raucous, happy to be behind our own lesbian banner for a change. I can almost hear a couple of the Dyke readers murmuring as they turned the pages. What's the big deal? I don't need anybody's validation. But if you don't think it makes a difference, it's because you don't know. Maybe you're dulled a little by seeing one or two lesbian faces on TV in your local politics, one among thousands. Well, imagine if what it's like to suddenly be the majority, not even 1 in 10 on the street or whatever it is, but the 100%. I suppose that would be my lesbian dream if I could describe it now. To be big enough to count, to take up space in the great brain of the country for even 10 minutes a day, to be free. At the official march the next day, I walked in a daze, a little off to the side, feeling too shy for the Avenger capes and shields and line dancing, though I have to say we looked good. Everybody along the route cheered us. The sun was out. Girls took off their shirts and slathered on sunscreen, and the Avengers danced and danced, all the way to the mall's vast expanse of green. We climbed back in our vans with the sense that anything was possible. 20,000 dykes in the street today, a million tomorrow. Okay, that's the end of chapter 8. So I guess I have time to read chapter 9. I think we're going to finish the section 1 today, actually. I need to. Actually, I have half an hour. I can do at least one more chapter, okay? Lisa says she loves the art in the background. Aquamarina mailed it to me. Isn't it cool? It's so cool. Like I was saying, I need to reorganize my bedroom because I want the stuff on the wall behind me to be like intentionally in the shot, instead of just being like my bedroom. Yeah. Uh, Thank you very much to Aquamarina for mailing me this amazing art. Um, oh, Lisa is saying that she was kind of inspired by my live streams, and Michelle was saying that she kind of felt like the live chat in Lisa's live stream was similar to this one. Yeah, I'm really glad. Like, I'm not trying to be arrogant or say that I did something cool, but like, if I am creating lesbian space or women's space or whatever, I'm very glad for that to spread and for the women to be doing that themselves. Like, it's not like I own it or something. Like, I just want women to have their own spaces and their own to take up space, to speak, to share their thoughts and opinions and feelings with other women. Like, that's fucking great. That's amazing. I didn't think of it that way, but yeah. Ocarina says fan art. This is the first fan art that's ever been mailed to me. All the other fan art I've had is like I've had two fan arts in the past, and they were both like sent to me on Twitter or Getter or something. Um, Interesting. Birdie Prince says 1942 American Thesaurus of Slang lists bulldyker as a synonym for lesbian. The etymology of bulldyke is obscure, but may be related to the late 19th century use of dyke, ditch for the vulva. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. Okay, let's read one more chapter and then jump in the shower. Mama, Mama, how are you, baby? Oh my god, Maya. Okay. Oh, thank you, Izzy Fox. Izzy Fox is recommending a playlist by Radical Ramblings called Political Lesbian Nonsense. It's 8 videos. Amazing. Thank you. Um, okay. Chapter 9. And why not? Why not be hopeful for change? I'd sit in that dusty room and positively beam as Marlene read the latest excited letter from some teenage dyke in the heartland who was thrilled to know there was someone somewhere as disgruntled as she was. New chapters sprang up everywhere, from San Francisco to Minneapolis and New Orleans. Some were already planning Dyke marches to coincide with local gay pride marches in June. The motto for New York's was Lesbian and Lust for Power. I was one of the organizers again, and two artist members, Martha Burgess and Kathleen Mackenzie, volunteered to build an enormous bed to push down the street. Somebody else was a stitcher to somebody else was stitching together a giant vulva costume, and Amy Parker, who usually looked like a bespectacled Velma from Scooby-Doo, agreed to wear it. The march was going to be absolutely amazing, even better than DC. We'd knock their socks off, flood the streets. I can't describe the exuberance, the sense that the whole thing was more than an incipient lesbian movement. It was a kind of dyke awakening, with lesbians everywhere rubbing the sleep from their eyes and shouting with joy. It was buoyed for once by a mainstream media tired of all of the fire and brimstone and hate. In June, as cities across the United States began celebrating Pride, Newsweek would even run a cover story on lesbians, highlighting the Avengers and our success in DC. 3 million copies containing our fire-eating lesbian faces turned up on newsstands, in people's mailboxes, pushing back against the Christian right with our provocative cry, 10% is not enough, recruit, recruit, recruit. Lesbians were suddenly and briefly chic. There was something intoxicating about seeing our faces there, blurry as they were, even if I knew other dykes were going through hell. Like skinny, sick Dee DeBerry who came back from DC to find her home in ashes. Her neighbors in the Tampa trailer park had threatened to burn the place down if she didn't shut her mouth about AIDS and gay rights. And when they did it, Dee was left with nothing much but the clothes on her back, a dwindling T cell count, a hostile insurance investigator, and the Avengers hotline number. When we decided to help, it felt like we really did have capes hanging from our own shoulders. Tampa was already on our radar screen. It was almost as bad as Colorado or Oregon, with violence rising after the city's own anti gay campaign. In a shooting case, the trial judge had just accepted a quote unquote gay panic defense, arguing that a straight guy was justified in blowing away the fag who happened to flirt with him. That's what you get for unwanted advances. Imagine if Dykes used the same rationale, killing every annoying guy who hit on us. We'd have killed the whole we'd have killed whole graveyards, depopulated cities. We set up a committee and started making plans with Tampa Dykes to fly down in June. I wanted to go. I wanted to do everything back then, but my budget didn't stretch much beyond lentils and rice and rent. I remember talking about it to Phyllis on the way down to Baltimore for a commitment ceremony of two Avengers. I was gussied up for the occasion in clothes that actually had color. I'd borrowed fuchsia cut-offs, and put on a tiara kind of thing with cloth roses, smeared my lips with pink. Phyllis Lutsky was a curly-headed, cab-driving New Yorker who seemed very placid and calm until she got behind the wheel of a car. "We're holding fundraisers," she encouraged me, swerving into traffic. "Look at it. Anybody can go that wants." I made indifferent sounds. I wasn't sure I'd work up the nerve. I mooched off the best of them, hinted around, borrowed, but almost never asked outright. It was a moot point after Baltimore. We parked on the street of a typical suburb. The house was a one-story thing with a yard front and back, driveway on the side, if I remember right. You imagine paper boys riding their bikes at dawn and men driving off to work at 8:30 a.m. in suits and ties. Not in high finance, but something that you didn't have to dirty your hands with, like accounting or insurance, though maybe they were plumbers made good. Who knew? I hadn't seen that kind of neighborhood in a long time. The wedding crowd was a peculiar mix of New York Avengers and Baltimore folks, including aging straight relatives who had been persuaded to come. Lisa and Sin, the happy couple, had gotten cute matching tattoos in addition to swappable rings. After the ceremony, we ate cake and finger sandwiches and goofed around. I tried to avoid that Avenger who had come to my performance and harassed me the whole time about alternative medicines and my failure in positive thinking, all while I was stuck there on the treadmill. In Baltimore, she and her friends started tossing around this tennis ball, all worked up like little kids on a sugar high, laughing when it smacked people. After they hit me the second time, I took it and stuffed it down my shorts, which was a big mistake. There, in front of the other Avengers, in front of the aging relatives in Baltimore streets, they pushed me to the ground, drug my pants down, and stuck their hands in fumbling around until they grabbed the ball. It seemed to go on forever, me on the ground with my pants down, while these fumbling, laughing girls restrained me, howling with their combustible energy and anger that the Avengers uncovered. That would explode at any moment, against themselves, other activists, against me, who nobody helped, while old ladies watched. When I finally got to my feet and pulled my shorts up, I saw the looks on their faces, or imagined them. Those brutes, the old ladies were thinking. Those dykes. And because I always do, I kept on laughing, pretending like it was nothing. Getting thrown down to the ground, my pants yanked down in public. Yeah, I was so tough. Drank more punch, ate more cake, swallowed it whole. It sat in my stomach for a week. On the way back to the city, I was adamant about Tampa. I wasn't going. I was sick of the Avengers. Why? What happened? Phyllis asked. You didn't see? When I got home, I wiped off the lipstick, threw away the flowers I'd worn in my hair, called the other chair of the New York City Dyke March committee, and to tell her to tell sorry to tell her she was on her own and I quit the Avengers for the first time. I didn't send a letter or anything, just didn't go. I got a hammer and ripped down the catechus, cutting myself a little on the razor wire, boxed up the tampons and amulets, and started tracing the streets again. Walked until I was sick, until the season started changing and heat radiated up off the sidewalks, stinking again of beer and piss and rotten garbage, and melting tar clung to my shoes like shit. Sometimes I'd pause at the river, drop on the bench, and stare at the Domino sugar factory on the Brooklyn side. Sometimes I'd stop by Catherine's. It was cooler in her basement than on our third floor. A postal worker shot up a post office, somebody else shot up a McDonald's, and I'd eye the cars that parked along Tompkins Square Park and wonder what it would be like to take a baseball bat and smash their windows, what it would be like to take a blade and slice spirals into my legs instead of getting tattoos like everybody else. Yeah, I'd take the blade and make neat cuts, and blood would curl down my legs. All that because my pants got yanked down at a wedding party. I blamed it on the eyes and thin pinched lips of those older, pin curled ladies who stared at my vulnerable body while the hands of quote unquote those brutes, those dykes, groped around in my pink shorts. They were echoes of my mother who tried to shame me with my monthly letters, riddled with Bible verses and feverish adoration of her delightful Christian friends, whose lovely Christian daughters landed terrific, good paying jobs God and then delightful God fearing husbands. I pray for you every day, she wrote. But she was mute about my sister Kim nursing a struggling marriage. Vicky, with a divorce changes and her own address changes, moving from Kentucky to Florida to Texas, where she wasn't quite the girl God wanted her to be. And even though my mother had told me a million times what a mistake it had been for her to get married and quote unquote and to have you girls, she kept enclosing wedding announcements, births, and deaths, neatly torn from the Louisville Courier Journal. Like, I don't know where she's going with this, but I basically think, well, these women assaulted her in public. Like, if I was in her situation, I've actually been in a similar situation. When I was in summer camp when I was a little kid at the YMCA, we were playing dodgeball and I kept getting hit, so I took the ball and put it in my shirt, like a belly, like I was pregnant. And then some boy like stuffed his hands inside my shirt and pulled it out, and I was like, "Whoa." Like I know you took your ball, but like you don't touch my fucking body, right? And then the counselors got involved and it was like a whole thing. But it's like she is saying um it's the fact that the women were looking at her in that way that was homophobic. That was the problem, not the fact that she was like assaulted. Like I think it her body integrity and like self was violated in a way. That probably has way more of an effect on you than homophobic women looking at you. Like that must not be a unique thing to have homophobic women looking at you in that way, right? Or it's like her own self-perception. Like it seems to me like she even kind of says it. She was projecting her own um issues with her mother and like with homophobic women onto these women. And so I don't know. Yes, Lisa says women can be so cruel. Yeah, exactly. I can't believe also, like, I don't know, it's very fucked. I get that these women weren't like explicitly super rad femmy, but to be a feminist of any level, I think you should be able to recognize, like, oh, these women put her into a sexually vulnerable situation in front of a lot of people. That must have some kind of an effect on her. Like, we're not okay with that. We don't want other, like, she was one of the leaders of the Lesbian Avengers and she left over this. Your organization is not sustainable if you let this kind of shit happen, right? Because women will just keep leaving. Like, you're not creating a safe space for them. And I know like safe space is like a stupid word and everything, but I mean literally if you are a lesbian action group, lesbians should be safe there. How is fucking supposed to get anything done otherwise? I don't know. Okay. I'd forgotten about them. They are brittle yellow scraps that fall from old letters as I retrace my steps, little messages of yearning and fury on her part, inspiring me. What else can you call it? But a sudden, total grief. When I was too tired to walk, too tired almost to climb the stairs, I'd visit Tar Beach with our two new roommates. Renz was moving to London with his boyfriend and Sinatra CDs. Boy Kelly, a skinny young act up fag, was taking his old room, facing the Korean deli. Sindra, a fire eating lesbian Avenger, claimed the office room in front. We swapped clothes, cut off jeans, sleeveless flannel shirts, necklaces and bracelets made out of leather strips and bits of thread. None of us had regular jobs, and we'd sometimes spend whole days on the roof, roasting in our underwear, while Amy was at her air conditioned office at the ad agency. At night, she'd prop an ice pack on her head with two or three fans going and edit the Avenger's Handbook, a handy guide to homemade revolution. Sarah Schulman had whipped out the bulk of the text, handing Amy a brown paper bag stuffed with handwritten notes. I'm quitting too after this, Amy said. Seriously, I want to have a life. She'd learned banjo and was cooking up a bluegrass band. Okay, this is like one of the things. Like, I need to have a life, so I'm quitting. This is like part of the reason that collectives became a thing. The whole point of a collective was that you have a group of women who all have the same goals. So it never relies on like one woman to do everything or one woman to be like a leader to have like a lot of responsibility. Because it's that this is the problem. When women get into activism, there's always like a handful of women who do everything and then a bunch of women who like she said, they'll say they're going to show up, they say they'll make commitments and not follow through on them, and so the handful of women who are actually getting shit done end up having to do like 90% of the work, and so they burn out, so they only do the activism for like a couple years, right? And so the point of collectives, well, I'm sure it depends on who you ask, but the point of, as I've understood it, of a lot of the like collectives in the 70s and 80s was that women could take breaks and not feel like they weren't doing anything, because even if they were taking a break from activism, they were still supporting their sisters who were doing activism, right? And that if they had a lot of responsibility, well, it wasn't one woman's responsibility, it was the responsibility of the collective. And like a collective, usually it's like a bunch of women who live in a house together who are like an activist cell kind of thing, at least as far as I've understood it in many cases. Um, so yeah, like this is kind of just showing me that the internal structure of lesbian Avengers was not sustainable. Not to say I could do a better job, but I'm just saying. Okay. Still, on Tuesdays, she and Sindra would go off to the center for the Avenger meeting, and I'd turn on the television and scribble in my notebook, watching the Mets bobble balls or cars explode until I heard them come up the stairs. Boy Kelly was hardly ever around, busy with the needle exchange or his 10 billion pals from Brown that would stop him in the streets if he ventured out of doors. A couple of times, his friend John came over to the house with a bushel of pills, and he would hold it down, and if he could hold it down, sipped a cocktail as he attached himself to the IV that was supposed to keep him from going blind before he died of AIDS. I liked John a lot. He was a flaming queen, with a quick wit, high pitched voice, and all the mannerisms people make fun of. He'd learned to sneer right back. Embrace your inner faggot, he tried to teach Boy Kelly, twirling his glass. Never be ashamed. Matt Adams says it's got to be hard to be assaulted by people in a group you're fighting for. It's probably easier to make it about other issues than to deal with the pain from that. Yeah, it's like a betrayal, right? Okay. I ran into Anna Simo around the 4th of July. She seemed smaller than usual, sweating there in the street in her white sleeveless blouse. She told me Tampa had gone well. They'd put together a pretty good march on the city hall and forced the mayor to at least make a statement denouncing hate crimes. Tampa Dykes had really opened their arms to the Avengers, shaved heads and all. Then she asked why I hadn't gone, either to Tampa or to the Dyke March. Weren't you co chair? And I told her what happened at the wedding party in Baltimore. She got upset, wish I'd said something, but I just shrugged. We stood awkwardly, shifting around. Anna made me uncomfortable. I'd felt something that time she worked the door at the party for PS 122, and I gave her a hug that was like really, really early on. I think that was like the second action they ever. It was one of the actions they took in the first year of the Lesbian Avengers being a thing, the protest on the public school 122. Um, and I gave her a hug and felt the curve of her waist under a silky dress. Nothing happened though, not then. We didn't click either. That time or two during the prep for the Dyke March in DC, when I went over to her apartment on First Street to check in with the Ministry of Propaganda. She always asked such terrifying questions. Had I done this or that? Though she always said, never mind, I'll do it. Or, I think Carrie's already working on that. And I'd begin to talk about other things, like what it was like to be 7 years old with your personality already in full bloom, and purely yourself because you weren't on anybody's radar as a female yet, not even your own. We wondered if we could ever get back to that. I still do. I flirted once, or tried to, during one of these sessions. We were standing in her kitchen looking for food, but there wasn't much unless you liked bananas or raw tofu dripping from a bag. But when I made my carefully deniable approach, she immediately brought up her most recent ex. Those olives were hers. Want some? I turned some interesting shade and ran all the way over to Catherine's apartment, where I got stoned and complained bitterly, as always, about my incompetence with girls. Okay. Um, when we were done dithering, Anna and I made a date to see Orlando that Sunday at the Angelica. We met in the lobby, which was so cold I started shivering. I couldn't remember the last time I'd seen a movie. There were always that there were always there was always the TV to watch, or the river, or small walk talks. Our small talks were riveting. God, it's hot, a scorcher. We bought our tickets and deferred nervously to each other when it came to choosing seats. Whatever you want, I don't care, she fibbed. Me either, I lied. Quentin Crisp and Queen Elizabeth. I whispered to Anna he'd been in my house just the year before eating pancakes with a cloak draped over his chair. Then I mustered up what courage I had, inched my hand over, and took hers. She didn't scream or invoke her ex girlfriend, so that was good. And we left them there, the two hands, like a Berlin Wall, making the point we were joined and separated, getting sweaty, holding us together. I hoped she would do something, because I didn't know what to do next, except sit there, my hand going numb until the credits ended. It was still broiling when we left, walking west to the Hudson Piers, where it smelled of salt and fish and rotting wood. From a distance, Lady Liberty watched over the cruising men like a kind of saint, and blessed them as they looked for lovers, or, having found them, locked mouths and hands, and got hand jobs beneath a brutal sun. There was something comforting about it all. All that faggy sexual energy, none of it directed towards us. We walked towards the end of the pier, admiring the water, and began to kiss. Kissed some more. Sat weak-kneed down on the soft splintering planks as the gulls screamed. After a while of that, we got up again to hail a taxi and stumbled to Anna's soft, air-conditioned bed, where we stayed for about a week until she had to go to a meeting for Dyke TV, and I went back to Avenue B. Okay, so she finally got together with Anna, and that's the end of section 1. We are 1/4 of the way through the well. How big are the sections? Yeah, they're all roughly about 60 pages. So we're 1/4 of the way through the book, guys. Okay, gonna wrap this up. Um, Izzy Fox says, I have seen the movie Orlando so many times, read the book as a teenager too. Yeah, I have it here, but I haven't read it. Um, I've heard it's very depressing, so I've been like putting it off. Um, I have to say, I really, I don't even know how to, like, verbalize it. I'm very disappointed to learn this, that, like, she was, like, basically sexually assaulted by other lesbian Avengers, and then when one lesbian Avenger, well, first of all, a bunch of them witnessed it and seemed to, like, not even know what the fuck they saw or ignore what it was or whatever, and then when she did tell this Anna, who, like, became her girlfriend, I guess, um, she was angry about it, but they didn't, like, go to the lesbian Avengers and be like, "Yo, we need to make sure this doesn't happen again," or, "We need to, like, formally address this," or something. Like, I don't know. It seems like there was no accountability amongst the women, and that is fucked up. Like, if you really respect the other women, there should be some kind of an accountability, shouldn't there? I don't know. Anyway, um, Momo is, like, all stretched out. She's like, "Momo." She can't even turn around to see me. It's too much work. Okay, so I have to go. Um, Lisa says women scare me sometimes. Yeah, me too. Um, yeah. Anyway, I will see you guys tomorrow for the soapbox. Okay? Is this the first time reading this book? Yes, all of the books that I read on here I've never read before. Um, yeah. Lisa, exactly. Sorry, not Lisa. Michelle says, Benji, it's scary how they thought behaving like men and gaslighting that it was a joke may have entered into her decision not to say something. Yes, very, very true. Very, very true. Like, again, they weren't like implicitly like lesbian separatists or like radical feminists or whatever. So you can't really like expect them to have had that kind of an analysis of it. But I feel like on a very base level, just as like feminists who are lesbians, they should have understood like the very basics situation of like that what you're saying. Behaving like men and gaslighting her as a joke. Like that is not a good thing for women or lesbians or the women in your group. Anyway, okay. I'm off to IKEA, so I'm gonna have a fucking great day. I'm very excited. I fucking love IKEA. My friend was like, "Let's hang out somewhere that's not inside your house," and I was like, "But I haven't left my house in like years. Where do people go when they're not at work?" And she was like, "Let's go to IKEA," and I was like, "Yes, I love IKEA. I really, really love IKEA. It's like my favorite place." Um, okay, yeah, okay. So I'll see you guys tomorrow at noon Eastern Standard Time, which is 9 a.m. Pacific Time, which is 5 p.m. London time. Okay. Okay. Bye.